The wind carried a cold weight that day, slicing through the small cemetery like icy whispers of the past. Thomas Merrick knelt at a fresh mound of earth, his hands trembling, clutching the faded bouquet of daisies he had picked from the overgrown patch behind his apartment. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that seemed to absorb the sunlight itself, leaving him hollowed, broken, and utterly alone. The world moved around him, birds chirped, leaves rustled, but Thomas barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the carved letters on the granite headstone, Isla Merrick, 8 years old, forever in our hearts. If you believe in kindness, second chances, or the enduring strength of love, take a moment now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Spark, because today's story is a journey through heartbreak and hope. Thomas had not left his apartment for 3 days. Friends called, neighbors knocked, the mailman waved. He simply nodded in return, unable to form words that weren't lodged in a storm of grief. His wife, Clara, had left 2 years ago, worn thin by Thomas' inability to cope after the accident, leaving him to navigate the grief alone. But Isla had been his entire world, and now, as he knelt in the late autumn sunlight, the weight of her absence pressed down so heavily on his chest that he thought he might never breathe again. The accident replayed in his mind like a cruel film. It had been a bright morning, the kind that made the sky seem impossibly blue. Isla had been laughing, skipping along the sidewalk, chasing the tiny stray cat that had adopted their street. Thomas had been distracted for a moment, a phone call, a knock on the door, and in that heartbeat everything changed. The memory of her bright eyes, wide with surprise and fear, haunted him. He could still hear the screech of tires and the sickening impact that followed. He could still feel the helplessness that had frozen his limbs, leaving him to hold her lifeless body in his arms as the world blurred around him. For months afterward, Thomas wandered through life like a ghost. The apartment they had shared was suffocatingly quiet, the walls heavy with echoes of laughter that would never return. At night, he would sit by Isla's empty bed, tracing the edges of her toys, her books, her tiny shoes lined neatly under the bed. He spoke to her in whispers that no one else could hear, begging forgiveness from a little girl who could no longer answer. Friends tried to intervene, bringing meals, offering distractions, but nothing could fill the void. Thomas felt untethered, a man lost in the tide of his own sorrow. The cemetery that day was nearly empty, save for a few scattered visitors tending to other graves. The sun, low in the sky, filtered through the bare branches, casting long shadows across the rows of stones. Thomas pressed his forehead against the granite, and the tears flowed freely, wetting the carved letters, smudging the bouquet of daisies he held like a fragile shield against the cruelty of the world. "I'm so sorry, Isla," he whispered, voice cracking. "I failed you. I should have been there." What he did not see, what he could not imagine, was the small, gentle figure standing behind him, hidden by the sway of the cemetery grass. Isla, not as a memory, but as herself, eyes wide and filled with a quiet warmth, watched him. Her presence was ethereal, almost shimmering in the sunlight. She had returned in a form that only her father could not perceive, an invisible witness to the man who had loved her more than life itself. Her tiny hands clutched a single dandelion, which she had found growing near the path, a small gift for the father she had thought shed lost forever. Thomas' grief carried him into the past and back again. He remembered Isla's laughter at breakfast, the way she had insisted on choosing the pancake shapes herself, the little dances she performed in the living room just to make him smile. Those memories, bittersweet and tender, felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He longed to turn back time, to undo the cruel twist of fate that had snatched her from him. Yet he also remembered how Isla had faced life fearlessly, how she had insisted that no sadness could last forever, that love had a way of finding its way even through the darkest storms. Hours passed in silence. Thomas did not notice the chill creeping into the air or the small flock of birds that had alighted on nearby branches. He did not notice the gentle rustle of leaves or the way the sunlight caught the tears on his cheeks, making them sparkle like fragile crystals. His entire existence had condensed into that one moment at the gravesite, a fragile connection to a child whose presence had once illuminated every corner of his life. And then, almost imperceptibly, the world shifted. A faint warmth brushed against his shoulder, a sense of being watched, not with judgment, but with love. He looked around, confusion etched across his grief-stricken face. There was no one there, just the cemetery, empty except for him. Yet the feeling remained, persistent and gentle. It was almost as if Isla's spirit, unbound and forgiving, was sending him a message, an assurance that she was okay, that she had forgiven him, and that his love had reached her, no matter the cruel divide between life and death. Thomas' knees gave way, and he sank fully onto the cold ground. His sobs became quieter, less frantic, more contemplative. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to feel something beyond despair. There was sorrow, yes, but there was also an undercurrent of hope, a fragile thread of healing weaving its way through the raw wounds of his heart. Over the next few weeks, Thomas began small routines. He visited the cemetery daily, bringing flowers, reading Isla's favorite stories aloud, talking to her as if she was still there. Neighbors noticed him pausing more often to smile at passing children or to help an elderly man with his.